morning sun had barely crested the horizon when David stepped outside his new home. Coffee in hand, ready to enjoy the peaceful suburban quiet. He had moved here only weeks ago, drawn by the promise of calm streets and friendly neighbors. But as he crossed the manicured lawn toward his garden, stomach sank bright. Blinding white stains marred the vibrant green grass and delicate blooms he had painstakingly planted just days before. The chemicals had eaten through the leaves, leaving jagged scars of destruction. It was an unmistakable message. Someone had doused his yard with bleach. David's eyes narrowed as he scanned the neighborhood. Windows shuttered, cars idled silently in driveways, and a few distant figures glanced nervously his way before quickly disappearing behind curtains. The neighborhood was no stranger to petty HOA disputes. But this felt different, malicious. Rumors had already started to spread. Karen, known to everyone simply as Karen, the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, had long wielded her authority. Like a weapon. Known for her sharp tongue and unforgiving rule enforcement, she ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist and a thick binder of community standards. Some whispered she enjoyed the power a little too much. David recalled their brief encounter during his move-in orientation. Karen's icy gaze had seemed to pierce right through him. He had dismissed it as typical HOA posturing. But now, with his garden defiled, he knew better. A sharp knock startled him from his thoughts. David opened the door to find Mrs. Patterson from next door, clutching her purse tightly. "David, dear, I heard about your garden. It's awful," she whispered, glancing furtively around. "You've got to be careful around here. Karen's been on edge lately. She doesn't like newcomers rocking the boat." David nodded slowly, weighing her words. Something about this neighborhood was off, like a simmering pot waiting to boil over. Later that day, David stood in his yard, examining the damage under the harsh midday sun. The bleach stains weren't just careless vandalism. They were a calculated act meant to intimidate, to mark territory. He reached for his phone. Fingers hesitating before dialing a number he hadn't used since taking the house. "Yeah, it's me," David said quietly when the call connected. "There's been an incident. I think Karen's involved. We need to be ready." The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Stay low. I'm tracking the situation." David slipped the phone into his pocket and turned back to the ruined garden. The bleach had crossed a line, but David was no ordinary neighbor. He knew that now. As twilight fell, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Lights flickered on behind curtains, and doors closed a little more firmly. The whispers grew louder. "Who is this new resident? Why won't they back down?" David stood in the dark, staring at the white scars on his lawn, feeling the weight of eyes watching him from every window. The war had begun. The morning after the Bleach attack, David found an envelope slipped under his front door. Its thick, official-looking paper instantly set his nerves on edge. He hesitated before tearing it open. Unfolding a letter stamped with the HOA's emblem, Karen's unmistakable signature scrawled at the bottom. The letter was a stern warning. It accused David of violating multiple community rules, despite his careful compliance. The tone was cold, legalistic, and dripping with veiled threats of hefty fines and possible legal action if he didn't correct his behavior immediately. It was clear Karen intended this letter to intimidate, to silence him before he could challenge her further. David's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about a garden anymore. It was a calculated campaign to drive him out. He glanced down the street, spotting Karen's white SUV parked conspicuously in front of her house. Through the tinted windows, he imagined her steely eyes watching, waiting for his next move. Over the next few days, the harassment escalated. David found strange surveillance cameras discreetly mounted on his property, small, black domes tucked beneath eaves and hidden in bushes. No one had mentioned installing them. No HOA notices about added security. Whoever put them there was watching every step he took. Late one evening, as David returned from a run, he noticed an unmarked black sedan parked a few houses down, its engine humming quietly. The driver's face was obscured in shadow, but the car's lingering presence was unmistakable. Its pulse quickened. He wasn't just a target, he was being stalked at the next HOA board meeting. David decided to confront Karen face to face. The community center was packed with neighbors eager to see the drama unfold. Karen presided over the meeting with her usual air of superiority, clipboard in hand, ready to dictate terms. When David stepped forward, Karen's smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed into icy slits. "You've clearly been disruptive," she said, voice sharp. "This neighborhood has rules. If you want to live here, you'll learn to follow them." David held his ground, voice steady but firm. Following every rule. What happened to my garden was vandalism, and it wasn't by accident. Karen laughed coldly. Accusations without proof won't get you anywhere. Maybe you should focus on being a better neighbor. The room buzzed with whispers and sideways glances. Some neighbors avoided David's gaze, while others looked on with quiet sympathy. But Karen's allies sat rigidly, ready to back her up. After the meeting, David received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was distorted, cold. "Back off, or you'll regret it." He knew this wasn't just neighborhood politics anymore. Karen was using every tool at her disposal: threats, surveillance, intimidation to break him. But David wasn't about to be bullied that night. As he sat reviewing his garden's damage under the weak glow of his porch light, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "You're not alone." Help is coming. A flicker of hope sparked inside him, yet beneath the calm surface, the neighborhood's simmering tension was reaching a boiling point. Karen's grip tightened, her campaign of control growing more ruthless by the hour, and David's quiet defiance was about to unleash a storm no one saw coming. The night settled over the neighborhood like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Most houses were dark, curtains drawn tight as if to keep secrets from spilling onto the quiet streets. But David's home was a beacon of restless light, a small island of resistance in the sea of fear Karen had spread around midnight. David awoke to a faint but unmistakable sound, the soft, wet splash of liquid hitting soil. Heart pounding, he slipped out of bed and moved silently to the window. Peering into the darkness, he caught sight of a shadowy figure crouched low near the edge of his garden, moving deliberately among the delicate flower beds. The figure carried a bucket and, as David's breath caught, poured a clear liquid carefully over the new blooms. The unmistakable stench of bleach filled the night air. His fingers instinctively reached for his phone. But before he could dial, the shadow froze and then melted away into the blackness, vanishing down the side alley. David's mind raced. It had to be Karen. Who else would risk coming back this late, under cover of darkness, to sabotage a garden? It wasn't just vandalism, it was a message that the war was far from over. The next morning, David found more of his plants withered and ruined. The scars of bleach stretched deeper than before, the flowers' vibrant colors replaced by ghostly, white streaks. Neighbors avoided his eyes as they passed by, some crossing to the other side of the street. David felt more isolated than ever, a lone soldier under siege. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from an unknown number. "You're getting close. Stay sharp." But close to what? The question gnawed at him as he paced his living room, eyes scanning the windows, mind replaying the events of the past days. Karen's cruelty had escalated beyond petty HOA disputes. This was personal now, and dangerous. David knew he needed allies. But trust was a currency the neighborhood no longer possessed. Who could he turn to when everyone seemed to fear Karen's wrath? Determined, he pulled out a worn leather case from beneath his bed. Inside lay a concealed federal badge, a symbol few around here could ever guess belonged to the quiet new neighbor. David was no ordinary homeowner. He was a U.S. federal marshal, signed undercover to expose corruption and intimidation woven through HOA boards in the region. Karen was just the tip of a much darker iceberg. He swallowed hard, the weight of his mission pressing down on him. The Bleach attacks were no longer just acts of spite. They were calculated attempts to stop him from digging deeper. Outside, car engine idled low and steady, its headlights cutting a narrow beam through the darkness. David caught movement, the silhouette of a figure watching from across the street, for the first time since moving in. He felt the true danger closing in. David's fingers tightened around the edge of his badge. This neighborhood had crossed a line, and now it was his turn to respond. David sat alone in his dimly lit living room, the soft hum of the city barely penetrating the walls of his suburban fortress. Outside, the night stretched endlessly, but inside, secrets thrummed like a pulse he could no longer ignore. He stared down at the small, weathered leather case resting on the coffee table, the one he'd kept hidden since moving in.
Slowly.
He reached out and opened it, revealing a shining metal badge embossed with the seal of the U.S. Marshal Service. This was no ordinary homeowner dispute. David was a federal marshal, undercover and deeply embedded, tasked with investigating a sprawling network of corruption poisoning homeowners associations across the state. And Karen, she was more than a petty tyrant. She was a key player in a web of intimidation and fraud, using the HOA as a weapon to silence dissent and line her pockets. The Bleach attack wasn't random vandalism. It was a calculated warning to keep him from exposing the truth. David's phone vibrated sharply, breaking the silence. A secure message popped up. Karen has eyes everywhere. Be careful. He knew the danger was real. Karen's influence extended far beyond the neighborhood fence lines. Local officials, contractors, even law enforcement had been compromised or cowed by her iron grip. David's mind raced through everything he'd learned so far. The forged documents, the suspiciously high fines, the surveillance cameras mysteriously installed on his property without permission. All signs pointed to a well-organized campaign of control, powered by fear and bribery. The question was, how deep did it go? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. His pulse quickened.
Okay.
Fingers instinctively reaching beneath the couch for the handgun he'd stashed there earlier, peering through the peephole.
Okay.
David saw a woman standing nervously outside Mrs. Patterson, the sweet old neighbor who'd warned him earlier. David, can we talk? She whispered urgently. He opened the door just a crack, eyeing her carefully. What's going on? Sue glanced over her shoulder, then slipped inside. Karen's been threatening more than just you. There's something rotten in the HOA. Bribes, forged signatures, intimidation tactics. I've seen documents, hidden meetings. And some of the neighbors are too scared to speak. David nodded grimly. I'm gathering evidence. But I need to know who else is involved. Mrs. Patterson handed him a folded envelope, her hands trembling. These were slipped under my door last week. I didn't know who to trust until... Now inside were copies of contracts, receipts, and emails that painted a damning picture of corruption. Karen and her closest allies had been funneling HOA fees into private accounts, silencing complaints with threats and false fines. David felt a cold fury rise within him. This was bigger than a ruined garden or a hostile neighbor. This was criminal. But with every step he took closer to the truth, Karen's reach tightened. "Thank you," David said quietly. "I promise I'll put an end to this." Mrs. Patterson smiled faintly, a glimmer of hope breaking through her fear. "We're counting on you." As she left, David returned to his leather case and badge. The fight wasn't just about reclaiming a garden anymore, it was about justice. But somewhere in the shadows, Karen was watching, planning her next move, and David knew the hardest battle was just beginning. David's nights had grown restless, haunted by shadows and whispers he couldn't shake. The more he dug into Karen's crooked empire, the tighter her noose seemed to tighten around the neighborhood and around him. With the documents Mrs. Patterson had provided securely scanned and backed up, David knew it was time to gather undeniable proof. He set up his own surveillance hidden cameras in strategic places. Voice recorders disguised as everyday objects, and encrypted communication lines. If Karen thought she was watching him, he was watching back tenfold. The neighborhood felt like a pressure cooker. Tension hummed beneath the surface, and eyes darted nervously behind blinds whenever David stepped outside. One evening, while reviewing footage from a camera planted near the community center, David froze. There on the grainy, black and white screen, Karen was meeting in hushed tones with a group of shadowy figures. Their faces were obscured by low light, but the body language was unmistakable. Whispered threats, secret exchanges, furtive glances. David leaned in, straining to catch words. "Make sure he knows the consequences," Karen hissed. "If he exposes us, we burn it all down." David's blood ran cold. Karen was preparing for war. Just days later, as David returned from a late grocery run, he noticed a pair of unfamiliar headlights glaring from across the street. A black sedan sat parked in the shadows, engine idling. Silently, the driver didn't move. David's breath caught. He took a cautious step forward, then stopped, sensing eyes on him. Suddenly, the car sped off, tires squealing on asphalt. But the message was clear. David was being watched inside his home. David double-checked his own security. Every door locked, windows secured, cameras operational. He even installed motion sensors around the property. He was ready. He had to. His phone buzzed again. The text sharp and urgent. "They're closing in. Trust no one." David frowned. Was someone inside the neighborhood feeding information to Karen? The thought was chilling. The following afternoon, David decided to pay a visit to a neighbor he barely knew, Mark, a quiet man who kept mostly to himself. David had noticed Mark lingering near the HOA office. looking uneasy whenever Karen passed by at Mark's door. David knocked firmly. Mark opened, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Can we talk?" David asked. Inside, Mark hesitated before admitting. He'd been pressured by Karen to spy on the new resident. "She's ruthless," Mark confessed. "She's scared we'll bring down everything she's built. But I'm tired of living in fear." David nodded, grateful for the fragile alliance. Together, they began piecing together a timeline of Karen's activities, using Mark's insider knowledge and David's federal resources. But the deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. Late that night, David caught movement outside his window again. A figure lurked near the edge of his property, vanishing when he flicked on the porch light. His heart thundered. The war had moved from documents and threats into real-world danger. David's resolve hardened. He was no longer just protecting his home, he was fighting for the truth, for justice, and for every neighbor silenced by fear. And he knew one thing for sure. Karen wouldn't stop until she was stopped. David sat crouched behind the thick hedge bordering the community center's parking lot, the night air cool but his nerves burning hot. The glow of his laptop screen illuminated his tense face, eyes darting between the flickering live feed from the hidden cameras and the darkened lot ahead. Karen had made her moves clear. She wasn't just a petty HOA dictator anymore. She was orchestrating something far more dangerous. Tonight, David intended to catch her red-handed. Minutes stretched like hours as David waited. The silence around him broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves. Then, just past midnight, a black SUV rolled into the parking lot, headlights off, engine idling low. Karen emerged, her silhouette sharp against the dim glow of streetlights. She looked around cautiously, then pulled out a folder, thick with papers. David's fingers tightened on his camera. Remote. From the shadows, a second figure appeared, a man in a dark hoodie who'd pulled low. They exchanged terse words. Then the man took the folder and slipped it into a large duffel bag. David's pulse raced. What were those documents? More forged contracts? Bribe receipts? Evidence of threats to neighbors? Suddenly, Karen glanced in his direction, toward the hedge. "Someone's here," she hissed. The man turned sharply. David froze, heart pounding. He needed to stay hidden. Every second counted. Karen moved quickly, scanning the lot. The man pulled out a flashlight and swept it in David's direction. David pressed his body against the ground. Breath shallow. The beam passed just inches from him. Then, a noise like a twig snapping caught Karen's attention. She strode toward the sound, hands gripping the flashlight and folder tightly. David seized the moment, silently backing away, laptop and camera in hand. He knew he had to get this footage to someone he could trust, and fast. But as he slipped into the night, a sudden movement from behind caught him off guard. A rough hand grabbed his arm. David twisted free, pulling out his badge. "Marshal David Harris," he said firmly. "Step away." The man snarled but released him. David didn't wait. He sprinted back to his car, heart hammering, back inside the safety of his home. He uploaded the footage to a secure federal server. His phone buzzed. Moments later, "Good work. This changes everything." David slumped back, exhaustion washing over him. He was no longer just fighting neighborhood disputes. He was exposing a criminal conspiracy, hiding in plain sight. But Karen was clever, dangerous, and desperate. David knew this was only the beginning. As dawn crept over the horizon, the neighborhood stirred awake, oblivious to the battle unfolding in their midst. David stared out his window, steeling himself for the fight ahead, because in this quiet suburb, the war had become deadly serious. David knew he had to act quickly before Karen caught wind of the evidence he'd secured. But going head-to-head with her meant more than just exposing paperwork. It meant playing her own game, a game of manipulation, fear, and secrets. He arranged a meeting with Mark, the neighbor who had reluctantly become his ally. Together, they mapped out a plan to draw Karen out into the open. "We need her to think she's winning," David said, voice low. "She'll take the bait if we make her believe she's in control." Mark nodded, though worry crept into his eyes. "But if she suspects a setup, she won't hesitate to escalate." David met with Mrs. Patterson next, gathering what small pieces of information she could risk sharing. Quiet whispers of Karen's past surfaced, rumors of financial ruin, bitter betrayals, and a desperation that fed her ruthlessness. David felt a cold chill. Karen's motives were more personal than political. The trap was set. David sent an anonymous letter to Karen, accusing her of embezzlement and threatening to expose her unless she met alone at a neutral location. The old community park after dark. Hours later, David waited behind a grove of trees, the park's empty swings creaking in the night breeze. His heart hammered with every passing minute. From the shadows, Karen emerged, her usual icy composure replaced by something darker, something almost vulnerable. "You think you can ruin me?" she said quietly, voice trembling with fury. "I built this neighborhood. I made it safe my way. And you want to tear it all down?" David stepped forward, holding up the evidence he'd gathered. "No, I want to make it right. You crossed the line with Bleach and threats. This has to stop." Karen's eyes flashed with anger. "You don't know what I've sacrificed." Then, unexpectedly, she lowered her voice. "But I'm scared of losing everything." David paused, surprised by the rawness in her tone. "Maybe," she said, "we don't have to be enemies. The words hung heavy between them. Could he trust her? Karen proposed a deal. She would reveal the names of her accomplices and provide proof of the corruption's extent. If David agreed to keep certain secrets buried to protect innocent families, it was a dangerous alliance. But David knew sometimes justice required compromise. As they parted ways, David's phone buzzed with a new message. Trust no one, not even her. The paranoia settled deep. The war was far from over. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable as David prepared for the final move. Karen's unexpected offer had thrown him into a dangerous game, one where trust was a currency he couldn't afford to spend freely. Yet, the evidence she promised could finally bring down the entire corrupt web strangling their community. In the dim light of his living room, David reviewed the files Karen had provided. Names of crooked contractors, falsified records, secret bank accounts, all meticulously documented. But the deeper he delved, the more he realized the conspiracy reached beyond Karen's small circle. It was a network sprawling through local government, law enforcement, even city officials. This wasn't just a neighborhood feud. It was a systemic cancer. David contacted his federal team, arranging a coordinated raid with enough backup to dismantle the entire year operation in one swift strike. The day of the raid dawned cold and gray. Karen's house stood at the heart of the storm, her fortress and the epicenter of corruption. David approached cautiously, badge in hand. Karen met him on the porch, expression unreadable. "I kept my word," she said quietly. "Now it's your turn." Together, they watched as federal agents moved through the neighborhood, arresting conspirators, seizing documents, and securing evidence. For a moment, it felt like justice might finally prevail. But as the dust settled, David's phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "You've been played. Karen's a pawn. There's a bigger player pulling the strings. You're back." Shock crashed over him. Suddenly, everything made sense. Karen's offer, the documents, were they a distraction? Carefully crafted setup to flush out David and his team. He glanced back at Karen, who met his gaze with a strange, almost sorrowful smile. Before he could react, a squad car pulled up beside him, and agents quickly surrounded the area. "Marshal Harris." A voice crackled over his radio. "We have a situation." David's heart raced as he followed agents inside Karen's house. In the basement, a hidden room revealed rows of monitors and files of days of surveillance far beyond the neighborhood, tracing back to powerful figures David hadn't yet uncovered. Karen's whispered confession echoed. "I was desperate to protect my family, caught between forces I couldn't control." David realized the war was far from over, but with the truth finally unmasked, he was ready for the next battle, because in the shadows of the quiet suburb, bigger secrets lurked. And David Harris, federal marshal was the only one standing between them and total destruction.